Hey there, U.S. Black History course participants. We are really happy to be able to talk to our JA cohort number 5. And so I told you all that you were my favorite cohort because of all the things you've had to endure, and you've even helped us to find creative ways to communicate with you. So because we lost 2 lectures and the podcast, we're finding all kinds of interesting ways just to keep the educational process going. And so we hope that you are well. That your families are well. We know that there's a lot of things going on in our community. And we just want you to know that you're in our thoughts and our prayers. And we just believe that we can lean into this together and really get through this together. So before we just start having a conversation about a few things that are on our heart, Karen and Harry, I thought I'd just check in with the two of you just to see how you both are doing today. Karen?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. Trying to figure out what is the new normal and how to go about day-to-day business, working in a different environment, get used to all the new technology, and then just acknowledging the extra layer of anxiety that comes with all of this uncertainty. But yep, that's where I am.
Okay. And you're feeling well?
I am, yes.
Okay, good.
Thankfully.
Good. Sure. Hey, Harry, how about you?
I'm doing good. As an introvert, being away from people, not necessarily the biggest shocker, but I do miss seeing people in person and being able to, interact and be able to move around. But doing well. Family's healthy. Kids are going to online schools and distance learning today, so that'll be interesting to see how they deal with that. Because I'm assuming that's probably going to be our reality for the rest of the school year. So. Just really trying to think through what it means to be in leadership at this time, because we're dealing with uncertainty at a number of different levels. So I think just trying to balance that and keep. I'm a planner, so I like to plan if at all possible. But right now that means more of a 2 to 3 week planning session than 2 to 3 years. So. Adapt to that, but doing good overall though. It's always nice to pretend like I'm somewhere else. I'm actually in my home office, but nothing like a little background waterfalls to make me feel like I'm traveled. So
okay, that's good. Yeah, that waterfall. I told you when you first came on, you looked like you were visiting Gilligan's Island. It took me right back there. I once said, "Just sit right back and you hear a tale." I just went right back. That took me back to my childhood. And so in our own ways, we're teachers, we're instructors, and we love bringing people into new knowledge so that they can act differently. We really think that education leads to some transformation so that we change ourselves, we change our world by really working together. And so, what we're going through, what we're facing as a nation, as a world with this virus is really a teachable moment. And this is part of what we want to talk about today. So many of our allies are trying to figure out what does it mean to think like an ally during these times? Like, what do we do? And, for me, one of the things that I've noticed and that I hear from my staff, because we're, predominantly African-American staff, serving the disparities that we're all aware of in this community. So whether it's reentry housing, and I won't get into all of the details because here you'll probably talk about that a little bit more, but this is what we do day to day. But we also have understood that many of our white allies or non-Black allies are not familiar with these disparities. And so you as history course participants have been learning about how some of these disparities got their start. But what you might not have put together is that when a crisis like coronavirus or COVID-19 takes place, it's just another crisis. Now, at a pandemic level, but it's another crisis on top of stress, issues with school, stability, couch surfing, unemployment, underemployment, trying to reenter the community after paying your debt to society. And then this comes on top of things. This is what it's like for the families that Nehemiah has been serving for the past 30 years. I'll give this example because we want you all as our history class participants to think about our world with new eyes. Part of the new normal is not just hunkering down in our basements. The new normal is how do we think about our world and how do we think about others and what does it really mean to be an ally? because now this isn't just theoretical. We're living in a community where people are not dealing with boredom and not knowing which room in their home to sit in. They're really thinking about food. They're thinking about so many other things. So I'll give you an example. I checked in on a friend of mine from Arkansas because there's some bad weather and hurricanes and storms predicted. I'm sorry, tornadoes and things predicted or forecast. So when you hear that, you think, wait, okay, on top of everything else, these folks have got to go in their basements and think about shelter.
Mm-hmm.
What happens if a school gets hit or homes get hit? What's because you think a tornado on top of COVID-19? No, for poor people and Black people, it's a tornado on top of COVID-19, on top of homelessness, on top of being uninsured, on top of working 2 or 3 jobs that you can't do at home, like being a cashier or bagging groceries. So who's going to help your child get online? Oh, what if you're not online? All of those things begin to compound. And so if we're training you to be allies, and that's what we've been telling you, we've been doing since the first session, we've got to begin to look at all of this. The tornado to the COVID sufferers is that's a great example of thinking about what COVID-19 is to the poverty sufferers. And much of the work of Nehemiah has been about those direct services through cultural competent, lived life experience, services and service professionals, really helping to empower people to live through these times. And so we want you to look at that and think about that as you're beginning to process, what does an ally do? Because there are immediate needs. There's food and shelter. There are those immediate needs, and those are things that we will be working on as well. But COVID didn't create those systemic issues. It only uncovered them. Is that making sense, Harry, Karen? Am I stating that accurately for folks who are trying to process this with new eyes?
Yep.
I think so.
Anything you want to add to that opening before I get into some of the specifics? Anything else we want to say to the history folks before we jump into this? Karen, it looks like you're about to say something, Karen.
Yeah. Just to clarify, one thing that you said was, yes, right now there's immediate needs with food and shelter and things like that. But also, we still need to be allies. And we can get into this more, but when we talk about being an ally in this time, there are ways you can be in that ally mindset and think about how are you giving, how are you meeting the need, how are you helping, and how are you supporting your Black community members who are already doing this work. And then there's a way to think as an ally about what happens a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, based on what has happened in history and the way that things have been set up for success or lack thereof for people of different races in this country, particularly Black people in America.
Sure. Harry, were you about to say something?
Yeah. And I think one thing that I've seen is that people have really wanted to know how they could make an impact. Mm-hmm. And I think it's always a great idea to remember that there's 2 parts to that desire in many cases. One part is the desire that we have for ourselves, where we want to feel good about what we do, how we spend our time, how we spend our money, and that's a legitimate and a good thing, right? At the same time, you also have that other half of that, where are you making the impact that is needed in a way that is meaningful? And I always equate that to kind of like love language, right? If you are thinking about someone that you love, and you understand love through words of affirmation. Somebody has to tell you something nice for you to really for it to sink in. But the person that you're talking to is they really understand it through gifts. And so if you don't give them gifts, that love is not communicated. And so although you might feel good about giving them all these great words, did you make the impact you wanted to make? And so I think during this time of crisis, we really have to be careful not to lean to the selfish side of that, where we want to feel a certain sort of way by doing something. We should focus more about being something, right? Don't feel like an ally, be an ally, because you made the type of impact that is needed. And hopefully your feelings will come from that. But don't chase your feelings of, I want to feel like an ally, I want to feel good about what I've done. be something, and that way you actually make the impact that you truly want to make. And so I think that's always important to keep in mind as we go about directing people who want to be of service, meeting the needs of the community. We always have to go back and ask the community, what do you need? How do you need it? When do you need it? Those principles that have guided Nehemiah for almost 30 years are true in a crisis, true every day. So
That's right.
And just like you trust the person you love, you don't know their love language unless you have that conversation and ask.
Mhm.
And so trust the people in the community. You're asking, how can I serve? What do you need? What form does that need? Trust them to give you honest answers about what that support looks like.
Right. You know, my whole idea about working with my team, with Karen and others, this is a few years ago before Harry was a part of our team, and the faculty who now teach for the U.S. Black History course, it was to really understand our history and understanding how we got to where we are. Because in understanding that, we become more shrewd in thinking about how do we untangle this to create creativity or to create opportunities. So, for example, if we're training people, we're saying, okay, we want people to get better jobs. So we're going to train. But no one's talked to the HR professionals. No one's talked to the CEOs of these companies. No one's talked to hiring managers who have not been trained in diversity and equity, et cetera, et cetera. And so people are being trained for jobs, but they're walking into the same buzzsaw. Their resumes not being looked at because of their name sound too ethnic, et cetera, et cetera. We're realizing at Nehemiah that not only do we need to prepare people for, let's say, jobs, but work with HR managers to know how to screen better, how to look for diversity, how to affirm that, how to attract it, how to move on that. We've got to work on both sides of that equation in order to see true equity in our community. The unique position that we find ourselves in at Nehemiah is that we've been serving folks for decades, almost for 3 decades, African-American folks who find themselves on the wrong sides of disparity. But in the last 5 to 6 years with our Justified Anger initiative, we've been helping white allies and our non-Black allies to begin to open their eyes to some of these realities, to understand what systemic realities have caused Black people to continually be forced to take a back seat and another back seat and another back seat until they're no longer in the vehicle. And so another thing that we want you to understand is what's the root causes and how do we understand that? Because you're right, Harry said this earlier, down the road, as things begin to bounce back, we will talk about the impact of COVID-19, but we won't be talking about how contagious it is because hopefully we'll move beyond that. But then we're right back to the same issues that Nehemiah has been talking about, that we've been addressing, that have happened because of history. We're going to be right back to that point, but we don't want to come back to that. We want to continue to work on that because guess what? We still have people who are looking for housing. We still have men who are trying to figure out how to reenter the community. Mm-hmm. We're still dealing with children who still need to learn because this is going to set them back even further. And so our work is not ignoring the crisis because everyone must face the crisis. But we feel like we're the people that are saying, but don't ignore the crisis that existed a month ago, 2 months ago, 10 years, 20, 30 years. That crisis is still there. And that's where we need our allies to tune into because we need you to help us to continue to address those issues because we're keeping our eye on that and not just the things that media's pointing to. Do you all see that the same way?
I do. Yeah.
And so Harry, maybe I talked to just a general overview, but let's just jump in about places where we're seeing the disparities hitting, and then we'll get into some of the program overview that we're doing. But like right now, locally, we're hearing about people who are inside our jails who have COVID-19. That's scary because you can say safer at home, but what happens when you're in jail because of a hold? It's like you haven't even gone to jury. You haven't even had a jury yet. You haven't even had a court case yet. We don't even know if you're guilty or not, and you're there exposed to that illness. Can you imagine the family members who are thinking because we couldn't afford a lawyer and couldn't afford bail, my son, my nephew, my daughter is in jail where this disease is growing. Could you imagine how scary that is? But that's an example of something that's hitting poor folks, people of color, Black people, differently than it's hitting anyone else.
And even those who get out, because I know there have been a number of people who have been released recently, and we don't have the data, so I don't know if it's a greater number of releases, but we know that some of them are coming out and they're homeless, but a lot of the services are shut down or, minimized because of COVID-19. So
Right.
even though the rest of the world is kind of, shut down, at least here, in our state, um, there are still people who are coming out of prison who are trying to re-enter society. They can't find a job because places are closed down. They have a hard time getting services because those services are diminished or closed down, but they still need a place to go. They need food, medication, et cetera, et cetera. And so those issues are now just compounded by the pandemic. Those issues weren't replaced by it. They're just magnified because something as difficult as getting out and being connected to services and people and housing and employment and advocacy, all of those things that we do when someone comes out of the house, those needs are even greater, right? Imagine going into, let's say you've been in prison for 5 years, and you come out and people are talking about Zoom, and you don't know what that is because
Right.
you didn't have access to that when you were in prison. You don't know how to have a virtual meeting or contact because they charge you money just to send an email. People don't know that, right? Just to send an email to someone costs inmate money, and costs a person who's responding costs them money.
Right.
So there are barriers that are hidden to this. So even just getting out of prison, even if you're out of that environment, becomes a challenge. And so so it just, some of those issues are just made worse.
Right. Right. So the issues of disparity that we've been studying in our history class, going back to the slave trade, to all the things that our astute professors have taught us, and they play out and they play up into the future. So someone didn't get a fair shot at a job interview. A child didn't have enough teachers who looked like them. A person not being able to make bail and staying in jail. All of these, each of these steps of discrimination and disparity now has set a generation or two of folks behind, so that they're more prone to the devastation that's happening behind COVID-19. So of course, we're aware of what's happening with COVID-19. It's why we're not having the history class. It's why we're each in our own homes. We don't want to work together. We want to model social distancing, but our hearts are still heavy because the truths of how disparities have played out in our country. And I love the last few lectures that brought it right home to Wisconsin. History class, participants, cohort number 5. Think about this. Shashko and Clark Pujara have been telling us, we have history of this in Wisconsin. We've had slavery in Wisconsin. We are not clear of this. Wisconsin our hands are not clean. And so what used to be just the headlines that we being Wisconsin, is leading the nation in so many disparities concerning Black people. Dane County leading the nation in so many disparities. Now it's not just a statistic. Those who are named or those who are referred to in those statistics are now the most vulnerable among us. And they still need those services of support, cultural relevance, mentoring, coaching, life coaching, job coaching. What do I do? This is allowing their anxiety to mount. And some of the folks who are in our reentry program got into trouble because of untreated mental health issues and stress and anxiety that wasn't managed well. Now you have all of this on top of it, which just means we've got to begin thinking not just about where we are right now, but what do we need to do to address the systemic realities? And this is why we still need our supporters to back what we do. Nehemiah doesn't exist to just educate white people about the realities of disparities. We have been in existence for 30 years to address these realities in our community, even 30 years ago in the late 80s, early 90s, when we saw this bubble happening. We saw this coming, not the COVID-19, but the disparities. We watched it happen before it was the subject matter of major reports or national attention. And now we have the COVID piece on it. And you all, being our allies, have got to help us. It would be helpful if you helped us to understand that, but also to begin to communicate that so that we're not just looking at what we're doing today. How did we get here? How are so many people in such a wealthy community at risk? And what do we do to continue to close that achievement gap today, tomorrow, next week, a year from now, 5 years from now? That's what we're watching, right? Am I describing that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. And then just going back to our history lectures a little bit, Professor Shashko shared with us that during the Great Depression, if we look at after the Great Depression in 1934, the unemployment numbers, it was really, really bad for the white community. Unemployment was 17%. And we know, it completely changed how our local economies worked. It changed, how people accessed resources, how people worked together, and what jobs were even available. But at the same time, Black unemployment rate was 38%, and the median Black family annual income dropped by 50% from 1925 to 1932. So in a 3-year period, Black families lost half of their household income. Why is this? Because of what you mentioned, Dr. G, earlier about where are the jobs proportionately going. We know there's disparities in who gets hired where. We know that there's a disproportional amount of Black Americans living in poverty, and in Dane County living in poverty. So if you have a job like working at a grocery store or you're in healthcare, you're more likely to be in a role that's either essential during this time or is going to be canceled. There aren't in-betweens, like the jobs that we're, all of us on this call are working in right now, where we can still find a way to operate. So these crises are devastating. We know that we already have a huge disparity in annual income between white and Black families in Dane County. And so this is going to be just like any other time in our history where this has happened, and it just further offsets the disparities that already exist. So we really just encourage you to kind of, when you're thinking about the impact right now and the impact that will be in the next week, month, year, years from now because of this crisis, look back to what you've learned on history and use that knowledge to help to be an ally to help us even this out as we move forward beyond just the crisis.
Right. And here, maybe you can just give an overview of the kinds of services that we've been providing, because so many folks focus on history and on that aspect of our work of what we're doing with our non-Black allies, that most people don't understand what our day-to-day work is with African Americans. So maybe just a brief overview of that kind of work, so that as we ask our allies to consider supporting us, as we've been asking throughout the course, they have a sense of how that support works and what it's going towards.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So really, we break our work up into 5 different areas. And those have been focus areas for Nehemiah from its inception. When Just With Anger came on the scene and became an initiative of Nehemiah, those same 5 focus areas we heard were still needs from the community. And so we focus on leadership development, particularly for African Americans. We have an Just With Anger Leadership Institute that takes some really emerging leaders and really gives them the tools and it helps them understand their own leadership styles and gives them a community to be a part of. We do youth education and development. So we work in the schools, after schools, and even during the summer to really help kids with academics, with their social emotional learning, and with some of their leadership development. A lot of our kids grow through our program and then come back to work with us to be coaches in our summer program. So a lot of our kids in our after school programs, a big component is feeding, community, and really just getting mentally ready to engage with some of the homework that they have to do. We also do family and community wellness. So we have a number of people who are working in the communities to provide services and also be kind of a mobile personal 211 to help families in need find out where they can get some of those needs taken care of. So instead of having to go to 4 or 5 different agencies, we have a number of people in the communities who are working to basically make sure that people know how to get plugged in and make those connections. Because many times it's not the lack of resources, but the people that don't know where they are or how to access them. So we have people doing that. We'll also work with reentry services. So housing, employment advocacy, and peer mentoring. We do that to make sure that when people come out of prison, they have a place to and the skill set and really some people to help them figure out how to navigate this. Because there's so many challenges that are unique to that population that you need someone that's with lived experience to be able to help you navigate through some of that. And the last piece is also our economic development. So we have a loan fund, and right now we're working with our loanees to help them think through some of these times, right? Some of them are not essential businesses. Some of them have services that have been diminished because of what's happening.
Right.
But the idea that we're thinking through how do you create create wealth in a community that has been denied that through systemic barriers, through missed opportunities, and really figuring out how do we help you get money and guidance and leadership to do those things. So we do all 5 of those things as far as our kind of our direct services. And then, of course, we do everything with Justified Anger. We're really working with our allies and our systems to make sure that those participants that we have, when they're ready to do bigger, better things, when they're ready to make the impact on the world, that the community is ready to receive them and will support them in those efforts.
Sure. And Harry, can you just hit those 5 areas again? Just run them down.
Leadership development, our youth development and education, family and community wellness, reentry services, and economic development. And leadership is woven throughout all of our programs and services. So
right. And I think what I want our history course participants to understand is we've been exposing you to history because we've been studying it. And what we've realized is to help close the gap, we've got to strengthen those who have been systematically oppressed, while also talking to those who have been beneficiaries of systems of oppression to understand that we need true reconciliation. Reconciliation isn't knowing how to talk to a Black person when you see them or capitalizing a B in Black. Reconciliation is understanding there are powers. Historically, there have been powers at work that have held certain folks down and elevated other people. And until we understand that that's a reality, we're not even fit to address the issues of disparity today or be a part of a conversation about reconciliation. And so Nehemiah has been able to do that with its Justified Anger initiative, so that we're not just helping African-American people just survive, we're helping them to thrive. And so to talk about economic development and leadership development, those are things that are not typically discussed with African-American people who are receiving traditional social services. It's really focusing on your issue. Why are you angry? What's got you broken? Where's your family? Where's your father? What are your issues? How often do you drink? But it's not really about who are you designed to be? What did you dream of? What got in your way? What derailed you? And so our whole approach of leadership development is making Black people more than just the brunt of all the discussions of brokenness, but it's using those individuals to create solutions. So the 211 folks, the folks on the front line, the folks who are helping those in crisis, were in crisis themselves. They didn't learn this in a textbook or in an MSSW program, Masters of Social Work. These are folks who have been homeless, unemployed, in prison. They've been on an ankle bracelet. They know what homelessness tastes like. They know what cardboard housing feels like. And not only are they able to speak to those who are in those situations, those same people speak truth to power. Some of those same folks have access to some of the most powerful people, whether it's law enforcement or governmental positions. They have access to those folks. And that's what's unique about our work. Typically, organizations that can challenge systemic realities don't have the cultural competence or relevance to be able to connect with, say, the Black community. And many who are adept at working with the Black community because of lived experiences don't necessarily have the inroad to talk with judges, police officers, sheriffs, mayors, governors, county executives, et cetera. We have the unique blend of doing that, in part because I've grown up here in Madison and I've lived in both worlds. And so I've been able to bring those worlds together. So that's the beauty and the uniqueness. So what I want you all to know is as cohort 5, or others who are watching this video who want to understand how do we do better, when you describe the work of Nehemiah and Justified Anger, you've got to understand that our work is really to strengthen all of Madison. It's to create a stronger Madison for all. But what that means is we know how to address the issues of those who've been oppressed, and we know how to address the issues of those who have benefited from systemic oppression, and how they work together to bring truth and equity to bear on our system. And where we are so prone, because we have beautiful trees and paths and great colleges and universities and lakes, and so it doesn't look and smell like disparity. That's one of the reasons why it does exist, because we as a community have addressed the superficial issues, but not the true underlying issues. And we are addressing the underlying issues. That's why we need allies. That's why we've trained you, because we need you to understand this is how we've gotten here. And what we're suggesting to you is how we move from here.
You know, and one thing that I think is important too is that sometimes during a crisis in particular, it's easy to think about our work as just being helping those who are economically or suffering through disparities. But when I looked at how, as a community, as a county, state, nation, we responded to this crisis when it first hit, I saw the empty shelves of food and supplies, and then I saw news reports of gun sales that tripled, quadrupled, right? And so part of our work that has to continue is not just helping those who are suffering with disparities, but we also have to continue our equity work, because we,
yes.
And we're hoping that our history class participants were not the ones with basketfuls of toilet paper and then go and buying a gun afterwards. We hope that wasn't you. But even if it wasn't, that is still a part of our community's response to this crisis. It was to go hoard materials and then get a gun to protect them, to make sure that no one could come take it. And so that work still needs to be done, because as a community, we didn't think about those who couldn't afford to buy a month's worth of supplies at once. We didn't think about how it might impact people.
Or getting off work at 10 a.m. to go buy that and then go back to your job.
Right. And so we didn't think about that, because I can't help but think, as a Black man, and when you look at the disparities in Wisconsin and the gun sales that go up, typically the people who don't have aren't white people. And so if you're buying up a lot of supplies, I don't think it's your neighbor you're scared of coming to toilet paper. So when I go walking, because I can't go to the park, and I'm walking through the neighborhood and it's a little cold and I got my hoodie up, are you scared of me because you think I'm a rapist and a toilet paper stealer now? Like, am I doubly dangerous to you? Might I steal your canned peas and your white women? Like, what kind of a danger am I to you now that Corona is here? Because obviously people are reverting back to some of their base fears. And so that is why our work must continue, not just in the communities that are, ravaged by disparity, but also in those communities that aren't, because they are creating and supporting and now reverting back to systems that are steeped in oppression.
You're right.
Yeah.
Because so much of this was exacerbated because people circled the wagons. They wanted to protect what was theirs. And that mentality is happening now, that when times get tough, we circle our own wagons. And this is where we need people to keep that equity lens on. And the other thing I'll say, because I know Dr. Reece wants to mention something, another area we're not talking about this, where gun sales are going up, are among Asian Americans. Because there's fear built in their hearts because of how they're being treated. I just read an article recently that was circulated by some of my Asian American colleagues that they have white friends who grocery shop for them. Because if they walk into a store, the article is just talking about what Asian Americans are feeling, because the sense is somehow that if you're Asian American, you're the cause of this. And so we're watching it, folks. And this is why our equity work needs to continue, because we don't want to throw this all out the window. I'm sorry, Dr. Reece, you were going to say something.
I just wanted to mention some of the more subtle ways that this manifests. Some of the things that Harry was talking about, times like this brings out the worst in people, but it also brings out the best in people. So we've
Thank
also
you.
seen, groups of people, gathering together, people asking their neighbors, what do you need? People standing out on the streets with signs to cheer on their healthcare working neighbors to get to work every day.
That's beautiful.
But in the things that you're doing, that are trying to support your community, you need to really watch out for those unconscious bias behaviors to come out. And this is something that some of you have participated in our Next Steps training. But if you haven't, you will, and we'll be talking more about what we're going to do. We'll have some online options for you coming up in the next few weeks. But once we equip you with the baseline history so you can understand why racism still exists, then we need to equip you with the training so that you can interact in a culturally relevant and responsive manner. And so one of the things to watch out for is, as white people, we often forget that the day-to-day American culture is white culture. And that's how our history decided that white culture was going to be the status quo. So sometimes we forget that there's certain ways people speak, certain language that we use, facial expressions, body language that white people use to communicate appreciation, to communicate stress, or just communicate in general. And when people don't match that style of speech, that tone of voice, that body language, we can sometimes misinterpret that as being unkind, as being aggressive, as being non-appreciative. And when that happens, even in our best of intentions to serve communities, people that need it, we end up causing more harm because we're projecting our own experience onto what other people are doing. So some examples of this, I'm in a number of groups on Facebook that are working to basically meet people's needs in this crisis. And I've been seeing a lot of tone policing. So there are groups that, groups on social media have to have moderators, have to have rules, because people can get really out of hand really quickly when it's an anonymous platform. But what ends up happening is these rules will often get, they tend to fit the white culture, or they'll get applied to people of color because what they're saying is misinterpreted. So I'm seeing tone policing of Black people when we're in conversations on these threads about certain issues. Things that Black people are saying and talking about will be called out as rule violations, where very similar threads of white people having the same conversations don't get called out. This happens on social media. Additionally, I've seen a couple of different threads on Facebook with Black women mentioning that when they're in these groups, if a white person asks for assistance and a Black person offers help, the white person most times won't respond to the Black person offering help. So they'd rather wait for another white person to offer the help before they accept it. And whether people are doing this consciously or unconsciously doesn't matter. The fact is that we have to be really mindful about our internal reactions, our conditioned reactions based on how our history has set us up today, to make sure that we are really meeting the needs and not causing more harm. And another thing that goes along those lines is trusting the Black-led organizations that are out here to know what they're doing. So there are organizations like the YWCA that are Black-led, Urban League of Greater Madison, Boys and Girls Club, who've been around forever, but they're Black-led, and the way people respond to those leaders are oftentimes very different than when we look at white-led organizations.
That's true.
And so even if it's a big organization, right down to that very grassroots person that's just helping their community, we have to trust that these people, they're in communities, they understand the needs. And so we don't need to ask for a big accounting of, we want to be transparent. We want to know that our money is going to do good work. But when you give the public radio, you don't necessarily ask public radio for a full report, nickel and dime, on what that money's going to. Public radio does a great job, and they provide a great service, and you trust them to do that service. So right now we need you to trust that Black-led organizations are doing what they know works. And so when you give those funds, be careful of the unconscious bias that's going to make you doubt that those organizations are using the money in a way that's responsible or in a way that's worthy. So just kind of look out for those initial reactions to those things. It's okay that you're having them. Everybody has them. But what's not okay is pretending they don't exist and then not figuring out what you can do to do better next time. And so these are all the things that are part of being an ally that are important to look at.
That's Reece, that was powerful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Because if history were different, we wouldn't have the disparity, and Black-led organizations would not be in the need or have the need to have so many white people support what we're doing. That if some of the wealth that we work towards stayed in our communities, this would be very different. But you're right, when it comes to situations like this, we're being very transparent that we're not just raising money to deal with COVID-19, we're raising money to deal with life, to make sure that our staff can continue to deal with Black life in Madison, Wisconsin, in a place where it is the hardest to be Black in comparison with your white colleagues. But you're right, that question is asked often of Black-led organizations. And if the truth of our history of disparity, if that didn't exist, we would have equal wealth in our community, and this would be a moot point. And so not only do we have to address the issues, we have to convince white people that these are the issues. We have been addressing these issues for 30 years. We have staff who can relate to the issues, and your continued support helps us to keep people off the fences. That's very important to communicate while still being very prolific and profound in the work that we offer the community. That's a unique blend to do that work and convince white people that what we're doing and we know what we're doing.
And there are another piece of that is marketing and promotion budgets. So if you're operating in your usual spheres of influence or usual circles, you might not hear about these Black-led organizations or even other smaller non-white organizations that are out there because they don't have the budgets to be advertising in the paper and isthmus radio ads, or they're just the voice has been diminished. So I would encourage
slick materials.
Absolutely, and I would encourage you to during this time, but during all times, to look a little deeper, do that Googling, go on your social media, ask people what organizations are out there that you might not be seeing, who's already doing the work. So especially before you start your own group, start your own initiative, look to see who else is doing it, because I guarantee you someone else is or has. And so it's really important for us as white allies to make sure we're supporting the work that's already out there. Look, ask, you can talk to us about that at Nehemiah too. We're very connected to the community and to a number of other grassroots organizations that are working really hard to meet the needs of the people out there. So,
and we're not ashamed to say that we're one of the few Black-led nonprofit organizations that is grassroots, which is supported right here locally. We're not part of a national organization, and we are not funded through governmental entities. That much of what we do has been through the gracious support of local foundations and many, many, many individuals who support our work. And then, of course, we have corporate partners that we really appreciated. But our bread and butter for the past 30 years has really been the individuals who support us on an ongoing basis. And I guess the way I put a bow around this is that we see our community, whether they're young children in our educational programs or men in our reentry housing or high schoolers thinking about college or emerging African-American leaders who are trying to figure out, can I find my way in Madison? Will Madison make room for my brilliance, for my genius, for my creativity? That we don't see Black people as problems to be fixed, but as leaders to be developed. Our children are leaders who need to be developed. That's how people viewed me, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing today. We want to share that in all of our programs, that we want to develop our non-Black allies to be leaders. That's an ally that responds. And our African-American folks who are in our programming, they are leaders who need to be developed. And that's the work that we do. That's how we strengthen Madison for everyone. We build in that inward fortitude to be able to stand, collaborate, and be a part of the solution. And there are not a lot of us who can say that that's been their work for 30 years. That's been our work for 30 years. And your support as this cohort or as others who may be viewing this, those with whom you shared it, this is what we can do. So clicking links, looking at what we're doing, becoming a part of that group of 500 individuals who will give some nominal amount on a monthly basis. That's really helps small nonprofits, that ongoing piece that helps cash flow. Those are things that allies can do. In addition to putting away dry goods in your basement or closet, or things that you already have. Please don't go out and buy more stuff so that it looks like we're asking you to hoard. Just begin to put things aside, because at some point, either we or a church near you or nonprofit near you, once we've learned how to clean all those things off, will need those kinds of things. So know that you can be doing that right now, but many of us can click links right now and become a part of what we're doing. Because again, the education of white people understanding what's happened nationally, that's just the tip of our programmatic iceberg. Underneath the surface has been 3 decades of holding Black people together the way this community held me and my family together when we came here 50 years ago. The same level of support, confidence, and people believing in my abilities and nurturing those abilities, Black and white leaders working together to invest in my leadership development. That's been the recipe for success to whatever degree I've experienced it. That's been the recipe. That's what I'm paying forward. That's what my staff is paying forward. That's what Nehemiah is paying forward, which is why we have folks who are being served through our Black leadership empowerment programming and through our white leadership development, ally development, non-Black ally development, because those are the 2 forces that helped my family to do what we're doing. We know what we're doing. We've done this. We've seen the fruit of this. I am the fruit of this. This is not guesswork. I am evidence-based practice. I am a result of a community pulling together for the most vulnerable among them, so that now I have the honor to be considered a leader, not just a Black leader, but a leader, community leader in this community. We know how to synthesize this. We know how to design this programmatically and pass this on to the next generation. Help us do that. That's what's important right now. That's what a non-white ally can do right this instant. You can do that right now. Harry, Kim, Dr. Reece, anything else before we wrap this up?
Just if people are interested in what we're doing to meet some of the immediate needs, which changes from day to day or week to week, or how they can help, if you go to our website, nehemiah.org, there's a banner for COVID-19 responses. You can click that and learn about all that we're doing.
Definitely. Dr. Reece, anything else?
Nothing to add. Just expect to hear more from us soon.
That's right. And please check in on others in your cohort to see if they're watching the video, watch the emails, because we're planning to do something Monday evening. So we're putting it together so we can have a virtual experience together. And please trust us. Click the link and know that we've been here for the long haul. We'll be here for the long haul. And we're already known for disparities. It doesn't take much for us to turn the tide on that. Cohort 5. We already have the reputation. Let's show that we're bigger and stronger than that. But it's going to take more than just addressing the immediate need today that's going to close the gaps for which Wisconsin's known. Let's do that. Let's take care of the immediate need, because that's what people are focusing on. But when this subsides, we, not just Nehemiah Justified Anger, we, all of us, you, all of us, we need to be unified in closing this gap so that the next crisis will not push an oppressed group back even further. Thank you so much. So process this, think about this. If you have not clicked the link to watch 13, please do that. We're sending you this information because we want to make sure that the educational process continues. So Dr. Reece, Mr. Hawkins, thank you both for being here to have this discussion. And thank you all for taking time to watch this informational video, because we want to keep the educational process going, because we're trying to create a stronger Madison, stronger Greater Madison, stronger Dane County for us all. All right. Thank you.